Hey there, Leafs Nation. Concussion Doc here, Dr. Cameron Marshall. I know you've all seen it already, but I'm going to kind of break it down to see what may have happened. We'll talk about this from a concussion perspective, but also give some potential other issues that may have occurred. So if we look at the clip, the initial thing doesn't really look all that bad. And when I was watching this live, I thought, oh, he's hurt. I wonder what happened. And then when you see him get up, takes his helmet off, and he kind of signals to his teammate that he's all right. Right? This guy skates by, he goes, yeah, I'm fine. And so I'm thinking, oh, he was just trying to draw a penalty here. Now, if we look at it from the other angles and slowed down, like this one right here, you can see that he goes through quite a bit of rotation. So he's got this rotation to the right, but also a lot of lateral flexion of the head. And concussion mechanisms happen a lot with rotation. We know that rotation seems to be more important than kind of just straight back and forth acceleration. So his head does get rotated quite a bit and laterally flexed. So it actually looks a lot worse kind of from that angle. And then he drops down. Now, still at this point, we're thinking, oh, like he's okay, he's fine, right? Okay, so let's look at a different angle. So this one here, you can't really see this one as well, but again, you can kind of see that rotation that happens there. And he drops. Now the overhead angle I think shows this the best. So if we look at this overhead angle, we can see a lot of lateral flexion right there, right? Now this is going to be important when I talk about the other potential possibilities of things that may have occurred, or at least what the medical staff would be concerned about. So that rotation, lateral flexion there, and then after we see him go to the bench, and I'll just let this play here, but you can see here the trainer standing there and he removes a bucket. And so we find out later that he was actually vomiting. And you can see Joseph Woll's still just sitting there, hasn't got the nod yet. So they're still kind of not too concerned about this at this point, but Stolarz is obviously trying to figure out if he feels okay, feels right, not really sure yet. You can see here the ice cleaners come by and he moves out of the way to try and, see if he's all right. But he ends up leaving the game. And we get reports later that he was repeatedly vomiting and actually was taken to hospital on a stretcher where he continued to vomit the entire time. So I'm going to talk about some of the concerns. And first I want to talk about there was a clip where he actually got hit in the head earlier with a puck. Now, I'm not concerned about that one at all because a puck is so light. And yes, it's traveling at a high rate of speed, and yes, it's going to knock the helmet off. But in order to get a concussion injury, there's going to have to be quite a bit of like whipping force of the head. You're going to have to move the head a substantial amount. Typically, a puck is not heavy enough to do that, even if shot at fairly high velocity. So, and he's looking right at it. He's kind of braced for it. So I'm not as concerned about that, although the media was kind of speculating as to whether or not that may have played a role in this particular injury. In my mind, this would just be a completely isolated kind of incident. So let's talk about what may have happened or what people may be concerned about. So obviously number one is a concussion injury, right? When you get hit in the head, and I'm just going to play this little kind of gif here for you, but when you get hit in the head, the brain is kind of like a jelly-like material. It sloshes around inside the skull. And actually what happens is the brain cells get stretched. And so when that happens, those brain cells get stretched, they go through an excitatory phase. So you get this firing of all of the brain cells happening simultaneously. Now, this can cause any number of symptoms. It can cause balance impairments, visual deficits, headaches, ringing in the ears, visual difficulties, or a whole bunch of different things. But it can also cause nauseousness, and it can also lead to vomiting. So he may have been vomiting as a result of that. Now, when there's repeated vomiting, that's cause for concern. That's actually considered what we call a red flag, which means that you need a CT scan to make sure that you don't have a bleed in the brain or something else going on that's leading to this type of extreme presentation. Now, once they rule that out, they could just say, well, this was concussion. So obviously they're concerned about concussion, but the real big things they're concerned about, the reason he would go to the hospital is not due to concussion. It's because of the repeated vomiting, and they're going to try and rule out more serious things. So the main concern in my mind would actually be something to do with the arteries in the neck. So we have our carotid artery on the outside here, and we have this one here called the vertebral artery. Now, the vertebral artery gets put under stress with lateral flexion and rotation. So I mentioned that when you look at that one angle, he's got a lot of rotation and a lot of lateral flexion. And this vertebral artery, which runs through the vertebrae of the neck, can get under a lot of strain. Now, if you tear that artery, you can have something called a stroke, which can also present with vomiting and those types of symptoms. So obviously they're going to be really concerned. They're going to do some scans to look at the arteries in the neck to make sure there's no damage there. Hopefully not. That would be kind of one of the more serious potential concerns. So arterial dissection would be one, could be carotid, could be vertebral artery. The other concern is something like a brain bleed. Now, the mechanism wasn't that strong. It wasn't like a huge hit. Typically, you need a very large impact to cause this, but you can get tearing of the blood vessels in the brain, which can then lead to bleeding in the brain. And when that bleeding increases in the brain, it puts pressure on the brain, and that can cause repeated vomiting, which is why if there's repeated vomiting with a potential concussion, we want to go to the ER. We want to get a CT scan done to look for any presence of bleeding anywhere. So that's one of the things that they will have for sure done immediately upon his arrival at the hospital. Now, other possibilities that can also lead to these types of symptoms would be something like a vestibular issue. So your vestibular apparatus is in your ear, and he did get hit on that side. So if you do get impact there, you can get something called a labyrinthine concussion, where it basically stimulates the nerves of your balance and auditory system. So that may be why you feel nauseous and start vomiting, is because your balance is off, right? So he's not able to kind of see the world around him. It's like you're kind of riding a roller coaster continuously, and that can induce vomiting as well. The other thing too is that you have these little crystals inside your vestibular apparatus, and when you get hit like that, it can dislodge some crystals, and those crystals can kind of float around in those tubes. Now, typically something like a BPPV, which is kind of what I'm referring to here, is you feel dizzy and you have vertigo with certain positions. But because this was so acute, it may be that those free-floating crystals were still leading to some symptoms. And one final possibility here, which is probably kind of the least concerning of them all, is just a stimulation of the sympathetic chain. So your autonomic nervous system has two parts. It has a sympathetic side, which is your fight or flight, and it also has a parasympathetic side, which is your rest and digest. The sympathetic side, the chain for the sympathetic is in the neck. And so a lot of stress and strain on the neck can stimulate an autonomic response where your sympathetic nervous system kind of goes crazy, and that can cause nauseousness and vomiting and that type of thing. So that would be kind of something that could happen that is not as much of a concern, obviously, unless there's damage to that, but that initial kind of just initial excitation of that is not as concerning as any of the other things. And so that can also present with the same symptoms. So either way, we have a potential serious injury or a potentially mild injury, and we're not sure yet, right? But with vomiting after a potential head injury or neck injury, we have to take it seriously, and so that's why they would have transported him immediately to the hospital. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and yeah, join me here next time for more breakdowns.